Wow, that was a great introduction, actually. It's been quite amazing for me because I heard about Dent through Anne but I had no idea of the amount of ideas, the excellence, the variety, the depth of understanding of different things. And when I did a presentation of my work at the gallery as one of the field trips, I met a few people. One of the people I met was Heather. And we got talking about creativity and neuroscience and sort of the flow state and everything. And I thought, this is amazing. This is like someone who is one of my tribe. This is someone who's doing the same sort of research and interest that I've had my entire life. And in preparing for this presentation, I had a little bit of anxiety because my work isn't for everybody. You know, what I do is a little edgy sometimes, and I push buttons and I address issues about, you know, sensuality, sexuality, religion, spirituality, you know, things that, you know, for some people it's great, and for other people it can be a little off-putting. And so I was wondering, you know, is this a conference? Is this a venue that I actually could sort of push the envelope a little bit, sort of present something that would make you sort of wonder? And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll never look at early Renaissance painting the same way again. You might see or discover something in the symbology, in the references, in the overlapping of cultures that you maybe had not been aware of before. And so this is one of the reasons that I call this presentation Relationships in Art. Because for me, I began to realize that from the beginning of my career, and I've been doing this for over 40 years now, and I was very fortunate that I started my career when I was about 22, when I randomly walked into a gallery in San Francisco, and the director there said, "Well, you're an artist, aren't you?" I said, yeah, I was here to do a show for a friend of mine. And he said, well, come back and show me, you know, some pictures of what you did. Well, that led to a relationship. It led to my first one-person show. It was a sellout, and I never looked back after that. It's just, my career it's one of those serendipitous things that just happened and my career took off. But I realized from that early first show, the things that I was most intrigued by were the things that he was most intrigued by in my work. And they were references to certain sort of patterns or certain sort of commonalities in the history of art, certain things that I saw that were universal, almost like a universal code that I saw that permeated no matter what culture, no matter what period, no matter what style. There were certain things that sort of resonated with them. And one of the reasons I have this juxtaposition here is you have a very contemporary abstract painting, and then you have a detail of a Grieg vase painting. And you look at it and it's like, you know, there's a lot of similarities in the abstract quality, in the kind of aesthetics, in the sense of design and pattern. And so it's almost as if there's something embedded in the human psyche that says, if I'm going to make art, it's going to have these certain principles. It's going to have these certain things that are going to resonate with you when you look at it. They're just going to feel, okay, this feels like something that says something about the environment around me. And so this is why I go, well, you know, where does this start? And you think about, okay, if you didn't have any art education, you didn't have art schools, you didn't have art magazines, you didn't have museums, you didn't have anything to tell you what is art. What is it supposed to look like to paint something about the environment around you? We got examples of that. You know, nearly 32,000 years ago, we had cave paintings. You know, how did they do this? Why did they do this? They didn't have sketchbooks. They didn't have anyone to tell them, you know, you need to do images of the things that you're eating or the things you're worshiping or the things that are significant in your life. But they did it anyway. So it was almost like, so what did they want to say about that? And why did they, and why did they say it the way they did? And so for me, it was like, they weren't looking for photographic representation. They were looking about something symbol. They were trying to create a symbol. They were trying to say something stylistic. Like if you look at the antlers here, it's like, these are extraordinary. There's something saying, they're saying, no, it's magnificent to see these antlers just coming out of this head. Well, you exaggerate it. You make that more important and you make the head smaller. And then you say these animals move in grace. So you make the line just a graceful line. And you go, okay, that's what art's supposed to be about. that says something about how we, when we interpret the world around us, we want to say something about how does it feel. It doesn't just look like that, it feels like that. I go, okay, now that's the thread. That's the thread I want to follow. And so I began to realize, art isn't just this linear development. It isn't like, okay, you do this, and the next stage is this, and the next stage is this. It's a spiral. And they understood this from the very beginning. You see it in all the petroglyphs. You see it in the way that they design their artwork, that the spiral. And the spiral is significant because you return to the same issues. You return to the same place, but you're a slightly different position. So you're incorporating more information. So you're saying, I'm not just letting something go. I'm not just walking down and saying, okay, this is insignificant. I'm taking a journey, I'm coming back around, and I'm seeing it afresh. And it's going to mean something more because I've taken the spiral and I've expanded it. And now I have more information. And they did this even three-dimensionally. It isn't just the line work. It isn't just a pattern or design. It's like you're talking about something being very fertile. Well, then make it big and expansive. Make it feel like it's just blossoming. And I like this because here you have a drawing from a cave from 32,000 years ago, and you have a Matisse drawing. These are the same lines. These are the same forms. These are the same sense of rhythm. And it's like there's something that says, this is who we are. This is how we express life around us. And you can be as ancient and contemporary at the same time. So it's like being inclusive and transcendent at the same time. You're going to say, okay, these are the ingredients, and I want to include them, and I want to push them farther. And this I find fascinating because I did a study about what different cultures at different times did when they wanted to interpret the human figure and how they would stylize it and what did that say about how they thought the human figure looked. And then you juxtapose them and you realize there's some similarities in these thoughts. This is from a Greek cycladic sculpture to an Indian drawing to a Modigliani, and this is a contemporary artist on the right. Similar compositions, similar positions, and yet totally different cultures, different times, but it's still a continuum. This is the same idea. You have Japanese, and the thing that I found fascinating when I was working on this, the stylization of this Japanese piece, when you look at the calligraphy behind it, there's a similarity in the use of a gesture and a form. And so you think, okay, this is something embedded in their aesthetic, that they said their calligraphy and their art and their rendering of the figure were all going to have a similar sort of calligraphy. And in India, it's the same thing. A stylization that was so specific to them. And then in the Middle Ages, in manuscript painting, totally different in terms of one of them has a very narrow waist, one of them a very big, one of them a very small head, one a very large head, but they're all saying something stylistically that is specific to their idea of what beauty is. Not unlike what you see here with the stylization of a horse. Now this I thought was fascinating because one of the things that influenced my work is Greek icon painting. And so this is an early Renaissance painting of the crucifixion. And I thought there's something about the stylization of the Christ figure. And then you juxtapose it with a Hindu god. Same treatment of the fabric. Same sort of sway of the hips. Same sort of feminine idea. But these are two gods. Over here is a pattern that is used. And you think, these are the same kind of idea of stylization on a grid that you see happening here, here, here. There's something universal. This was my first show in San Francisco. I was taking the landscape and trying to find a pattern to represent it. This is a Japanese kimono. You can see the same patterns. There's something universal. There's a way of saying something about the world. This was the show I did in San Francisco that represented the life I was living in Marin County, traveling up the road, across the bridge to San Francisco. It was a triptych because I wanted something religious. And it's the same stylization that you find in Benozzo Gozzoli's Procession and Grant Wood's American, the Stone City, Iowa. These are patterns in kimonos. Same thing, same stylization. I began to also realize that it wasn't about realism. It was about saying something about time and space. Think about in the Renaissance, they tried to create more depth. They tried to create depth of field, tried to create realism, shadow, light, they tried to create something more representational. Before that, they were more interested in, there were several stories happening at the same time, almost as if they were all happening simultaneously. There's no depth of perception. There's no scale relative to one another. It's as if you took the picture plane and tilted it forward and said, okay, this isn't about a specific time and place. This is about no time and place. This is about everything happening simultaneously. And it's an aesthetic that says something about how we perceive. We perceive our memory, past, present, future, and how would you depict that? The same thing here with, the background and foreground get a little flattened. And it all becomes a consistent narrative. Early Italian, same idea. Little stories happening everywhere, all at the same time. And then I became fascinated with the idea that trees didn't have to look like a tree. Trees could be nothing but an accumulation of leaves. Trees could become just a pattern that created a decorative element behind it. And in Japan, they created this whole sort of aesthetic that you can tell what they are, but they aren't exactly naturalistic. It's like a pattern. It's a way that the world feels rather than how it is if you just look at it. So now you're getting to how this influenced my work. This is a Bosch painting, Ship of Fools. The first show I did in New York was a very political show. So I did a lot of figures of men in suits, sort of like Wall Street and, investment bankers and people trying to achieve greater wealth or greater recognition. And I realized, I'm doing a parody of what Bosch does here. This funny little head coming out of the boat. And this same boat piece here. All these people working so hard, but the oars never touch the water. They're all just futile. It's this whole sort of idea that the human condition is something about it is sort of like a fool's game. And I was intrigued by this whole period of Bosch and Bruegel where they did a lot of work that was all about the sort of follies of the human condition. And I was trying to make that a contemporary kind of play. This is a piece that I did called Attached to Blindness. That was a direct reference to Bruegel's The Blind Leading the Blind. I've always loved that painting, and I just thought there's something about it that's so poignant. And in this one, it was like, again, this is like a businessman again, and he's tied to this other person that's blind. So it's like, who's really aware? Who's really leading what? And I always like to interject these funny little things in my paintings. And primary, these sort of, one of the natures of egg tempera is the ability to have really crisp, clean colors. And so, working with these sort of values of pinks and yellows and reds, that's very typical of egg tempera painting, because I'll sort of back up and give you a little background on egg tempera. It predates oil painting. And if you know the work of Bosch or Piero della Francesca or any of the early Italian Renaissance painters, they're all egg tempera painters. And it's only 3 ingredients. Basically, I say it's dirt, which is like, dried pigment, like siennas and ochres. Dirt, egg yolk, and water. That's it. Because there's no oil, the colors are a little bit higher color key. They're a little closer to fresco, they're a little closer to raw pigment, and so you get tones, values of color that are a little bit higher color key. So it's a little bit more like a stained glass window. And they sort of complement like gold leaf and other sort of things better than oil painting does. This is a fairly recent painting I did that was sort of a reference to Botticelli's Primavera. It was a portrait of a fellow artist I did, and I always saw her sort of reminded me some of a Botticelli. And so a lot of my work, I will do references to early Italian or historical art references, and sort of see if people ever catch the references or not. So here is something that, I've always admired Botticelli because he was one of the great egg tempera artists. And you look at it, and it's like this has become one of those iconic images of beauty, is the Botticelli, the birth of Venus. But you look at it, and it's like, those shoulders are sloped, that waist is a little wide. It's not a typical, what we think of today as a beauty, but there's something about it that's so elegant that you think, well, it's its own kind of aesthetic. And so I saw that, in the 30s, there's a Japanese artist who did this drawing that I felt had that same quality of line, that same sense of aesthetic. And this is John Curran, 1998. He's obviously referencing the same aesthetic. So again, there's something universal. There's something that's returned. It's like that spiral. You keep building on it, and you just add more information and say it's more and more relevant to who we are. It's like we don't have to forget about art history. We don't have to forget we have all of this information. We just incorporate it and use it again. So these are two of my versions. This is Botticelli's Birth of Venus. This is a piece that I did, and this is the more recent one that I've done. And you'll see why this becomes more and more incorporated in my work now. But the aesthetic is a play off of this. Again, this is why I say you'll never look at early Italian Renaissance painting the same again. I look at the shell, and I go, this is obviously a reference. So I obviously made an obvious reference. Again, it's incorporated here. But then I'm using these patterns again. I'm returning to some things that happened earlier in my career, where I would find symbols and patterns and things that represented elements and incorporate them into the painting. We'll get there on the next slide. This is a drawing I did of a friend of mine, and immediately when I did the drawing, I saw Picasso's, one of his Minotaur etchings. And this was something that kind of resonated with me with the talk this morning that Heather gave, where she was talking about, once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once something fills your consciousness that you go, well, I'm drawn to that, and now I see that, and now this is part of my reference material, then you have to start wondering why I'm drawn to that. Why was I interested in that? What triggered that sort of response. For me, I began to realize I was playing with this idea of the polarity of the masculine and feminine. It's like, well, how do I want to play with that today? How is that referenced today? I think Picasso was doing it, but he had his own ideas about it. It's different than what mine are. What it led to was a whole series that I called the Minotaur series. Those of you who came to the gallery saw this was a piece that I had shown there. And this series happened because I had people that kept saying, you do a lot of paintings of the female figure, but they all look so muscular. They all look so buff. They're all so powerful. How come? Why is that? And I said, if you look at art history, and I look at art history, and at one point, Rubens had these very robust women, very rounded, very full. Chronic had very pear-shaped women. Today, you look at the magazine covers, the women are all fit. They're athletes. They're physically fit. It says something about the evolution of the feminine, about the agency of the feminine. So I said, well, now if you're going to depict the female, you're going to have to show the agency of the feminine, the power. But then the question becomes, how do you create that polarity of the masculine and feminine? How do you say that there's this charge if two people are super fit? Then you go, I don't understand how that happens. When I started interjecting the Minotaur, then what it created was, this isn't another male, it is the potential of the masculine to access something primal. This primal charge that is part of the masculine polarity. And then it became a really interesting dance for me because I went through a whole series, maybe 30 drawings, 40 drawings, and it became this dance with these two figures. And it's sort of this coy dance. She was like looking at him and, sort of touching his finger and, sort of saying, is this okay? Is this all right? I'm like, this is what's going on in the whole psyche of the culture right now. Me Too and everything else is like, what can I say? What can I do? Can I ask someone out? Is it okay? Meanwhile, everyone's going, God, why can't we just drop down to our polarities and express them and just feel fully masculine, fully feminine, and have that charge? And I'm like, well, and I was so concerned when I did this series, like, oh my God, I'm going to get myself in a heck of a lot of trouble. This is going to charge all kinds of people. And the first one I posted on Facebook, I got more likes, more comments, and they were all from women. And I was like, wow, that's curious. So I kept going and I kept going. I mean, and I played the series out, and it ended up being this image. And for me, this image represents the integration. It's like that masculine and feminine is inside all of us. And it's when we realize that integration within all of us is when we solve that problem. And so that whole series became, for me, this whole series of negotiation, of giving permission, and then integration. So this is a piece that I did that for some reason, I did this drawing of these two, actually they were two dancers who'd worked on a show together in New York. And they came, and I'd been working for a month with this dancer, and she said, oh, my friend's coming, we'd like to model together. So I did the drawing together, and I go, what am I gonna do with this drawing? And I kept thinking of Guernica, and I don't know why. I kept thinking Guernica. And I looked at Guernica, and when I was looking at Guernica, I kept thinking, Picasso has been mining all of his mythological subjects, and he's put them into a painting that's referencing the horrors of war, but he's also just reviving his old mythological history. So I took this as, I want to have these shining the light on this whole idea of sensuality and nudity, and have the Minotaur coming off, having these figures shocked, and this whole sort of revelation of how do you reinterpret something, a Picasso Guernica painting, and interpret it in something completely different, and have some of the same elements, and realize it's all just mythology. So this is another one where I was playing with Picasso. This is Demoiselles d'Avignon. This is considered the first modern painting. And Cezanne was saying, Matisse was saying, this is a painting that Picasso is asking us to drink kerosene and eat rope. It's like, what happened to the beauty? What happened to the sensuality? What happened? And Picasso was saying, I discovered African masks. I discovered Cubism. I discovered how to break apart that whole idea of beauty and say, I'm going to present you something completely different. And it's going to be a modern vision. And so I looked at it and I said, okay, this is the first modern painting. Then I'm going to look at it and say, I'm going to present to you a classical painting based on something totally modern. So I took his composition and then flipped it, had the same model, and replicated the whole composition and said, I'm going to do a return to this idea of beauty in the classical idea based on the first modern painting. And so in my studies of all these cultures and different periods, I became really fascinated with stylization and hand gestures. And it really happened when I started doing a lot of images based on shunga, that I realized almost all the expression in the paintings happened in the hands and feet. And those expressions are very similar to religious mudras. There's something about in our psyche where we know that when the hand creates certain positions, it's an expression of some kind of profound meaning. And so I go, okay, how can I play with that? This is one of my sculptures, one of my first sculptures I did called A Delicate Balance. This is a Dionysus Solo sculpture called Insider. This was when I was at the Met a few years ago. It's about 6 feet tall, just a sculpture of a hand. And I'm like, okay, here we go. These are different artists, different periods, different cultures, but they're all dealing with the same stylization of the hand. And the hand has this enormous reference to the character of the piece. And so that actually was part of what I was playing with when I did what I call the Shunga series. And again, this is me going, well, two things. I was wanting to deal with something more explicit sensually, but I knew if I painted it in the Western style of representation, it would be too much in your face and it would be rejected. But if I incorporated Japanese shunga, which are erotic prints, you have to accept it because they're an established art form. So there's this cognitive dissonance when you look at it. You go, well, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? What does that mean? And why are there other people in here? One of the things I became intrigued by was when I was working with this model was she was half Korean and half Caucasian. And I was like, okay, she represents two cultures. And then I was thinking, okay, these two cultures, one of them is very flat pattern oriented, and the other one is much more three-dimensional in depth. The Western line of painting from the Renaissance on until about, French academic was all about creating verisimilitude, about making something more realistic, more depth. And in the Japanese culture, it was always about making a symbol, making a pattern, making something seem more ornate and beautiful. If you incorporate those two, you sort of incorporated the two ways that we conceive the world. You say we can see it, and we can see it for what it really looks like a photograph, or we can see it as a symbol and a metaphor. Both of them are part of how we conceptualize the world around us and how we understand it. And I'm like, well, what if we put the two together at one time? What would it look like? And for me, this is what came out of that, this whole series. This was sort of an arc of the whole sort of far east of erotic art across the top there. And this was something this is one of my favorite artists, Piero della Francesco. This is the Madonna del Parto. And I'm like, this opening of the dress and the placement of the hand, this is very much like something that you'd see in a shunga image, the hand and the opening. It's almost like you have all this ornate patterning that almost prevents you from seeing what the secret is that's going on inside the painting. And it's their way of sort of diffusing it, but also enhancing it at the same time. It's like you're going to frame it in something beautiful and then tell you a little secret. And it's like, okay, Piero was doing the same thing here. Then it got really interesting. I was given a commission to do 5 really large religious pieces, and the last piece had to be a culmination of what this whole project meant to me. And what ended up for me was this realization that there were all these hidden symbols in Christian imagery that no one wanted to talk about, that no one wanted to acknowledge were there. And so this is why I was nervous about getting this talk. This is where I can start offending people. But in my research, I was looking, and there were these manuscript pages, these 2 manuscript pages. And these are the 5 wounds of Christ. And you look at them, and you go, what am I looking at here? Whenever I ask people that, they sort of go quiet. It's like they don't want to say, I don't know, what am I looking at here? Well, this is the divine feminine. This is the symbol of the divine feminine. These are 5 bleeding vulvas. And you go, well, why did that get incorporated into the wounds of Christ? You think about it symbolically, it's like that's the new birth. That's the ability to give new life. So the death and the new life that happened were the same symbol. So in some ways, Christ becomes the symbol in the wounds of the divine feminine. So he incorporates both the masculine and feminine. No one wants to talk about that. No one wants to say, well, God, I didn't know that was embedded in the whole religion. And so it was this whole idea of the return of the acknowledgement of the divine feminine that was always embedded in there all along, but got thrown out when everything got reduced to one God and it had to be a man. And you come from a culture that had, monotheism, had all kinds of gods, goddesses, different worshipers, but then you say, okay, we got to reduce it to that. Well, what are you going to do with all the symbols? You're going to give them to somebody else. And he got it. And so you see so many religious images that are in this, what they call the mandorla. Again, it is the divine feminine. And when you look at it now, you go, that is so blatantly obvious, why didn't I see it? Virgin of Guadalupe, giant vulva. No one wants to see it. It's actually the mandorla. It's the intersection of 2 circles. And if you think about the circle as being a complete idea, in that the center and nothing in the perimeter is all equidistant. So this is a complete idea, this is a complete idea. And you try to think, well, what's connection? Connection is the overlap. They cross right over the center of the circle, and what's left is the mandorla. It becomes this whole whole sacred geometry. And so for me, it's like, it's a symbol of sacred, sexuality, mathematics, sacred geometry. It's this whole complex narrative that's happening simultaneously, and no one wants to quite address it. These are 3 pieces that are fairly recent for me. And this is where I've played with, I work with, this is all gold leaf in the background that I tool. These lines here are etched in to the gold leaf. This boat again is a reference to that sort of mandorla. This again, the mandorla is black, but then the boat's, the journey, the waves, and then here again, the mandorla. And here you get the stylized waves, this sort of thing that you find in Eastern cultures and Japanese prints and such like. So here, this is what I became really fascinated by. When I looked at these Japanese prints and I said, there's a quality of line, there's a kind of aesthetic, there's a kind of elegance, and no matter what they're depicting, it's the same language. These are like flowers and leaves, but it has the same line quality, the same elegance as this. I don't know if this is smoke or what. I think it's like smoke and clouds, but it's the same as the water. And look at the rabbit. The rabbit is the same elegant shape. So to me, it's like there's something universal about that language. There's something universal about that line. And so here is a version that I did of A Birth of Venus, and I'm using the same elegant line. I want to even have the figure be something that's like, well, that's real, that's representational, but it's also sort of stylized. It has that same sort of elegance that you find in the rabbit. And this to me is like, this is the iconic message for me, that Hokusai wave. I think in art history, it's probably one of the 10 top images that everyone sort of knows and resonates with. And I'll get to that later. I think there's reasons for that. But I did this whole series, and it really started with this one image where I did the drawing, and she was pulling her hair back. And it reminded me of a painting that I'd seen in the Metropolitan Museum. And it was, and I call it the pull, because she was pulling her hair like she was gathering her thoughts. And then I kept seeing her half submerged in water. And this is all gold leaf. And then I have this like koi fish. And then I have this heron coming down. So I see this as the unconscious and the conscious. And I see this as something in our higher nature that's swooping down, trying to access something from our unconscious, trying to come to the surface. And so the narrative for me became more about, what's going on internally in us? What are we trying to work out about the unconscious motivations that are stirring us that we're not even aware of, and trying to bring consciousness to that. And so that's what this whole series has been playing with. And again, here's that boat, that journey. And here she's actually just leaning on the wave. This is your painting. This is the print that you got. It's the print that Jamie got from me in the studio. And again, this was based on Hokusai's famous print, The Fisherman's Wife. And the story behind this is I was working with this model, and I did the drawing, and I loved the drawing, but I didn't know what to do with it. It was a pose I loved, and I said, I want to do something with this drawing, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with it. And then I realized she had a whole sleeve tattooed, and it was an octopus. I'm like, if anyone needs to be on an octopus, she does. So I put her on the octopus, and then that inspired this painting. And this is kind of sort of me wrapping it up. This is Hokusai's The Great Wave and Rembrandt's Storm at the Sea of Galilee. And I want to juxtapose these because they're two paintings of the same sort of dynamic. This is about the power of a giant wave. And you go, but they're depicted two different ways. One of them is a symbol, and the other one is somewhat representational. And it's like, what's the impact? What's the difference in the impact? And for me, it's like you feel the drama here, but here you feel the metaphor. You feel the sense of the power of this wave, because the end of that wave almost looks like hands trying to reach out and grab you. It's like they're able to imbue it with more layers of meaning than you can possibly do with this. And so for me, it's like, well, then that's the journey of art. The journey of art should always be trying to give you more layers of meaning than just a representation. So it's like, to me, from the very beginning, from those cave paintings, it's always, how can I imbue it with a sense of more meaning and more relevance to what it feels like than what it looks like? And so that, to me, is like, that's the journey. So thank you for hearing me out. Thank you.